Hello students, today we are going to discuss the second module from the paper Indian Writing in English, which is prescribed for the UG students from Kerala University. The first topic is Impact of Romanticism on Indian English Poetry. Romanticism was an artistic, literary and intellectual movement that emerged in the late 18th century and peaked in the early 19th century. It was a reaction against the Enlightenment's emphasis on reason and scientific rationalism, favoring emotion, individualism, and the sublime beauty of nature. So, Romanticism can be defined as an artistic, literary, and intellectual movement that gave emphasis to emotion, individualism, and the beauty of nature. Let's see what are the key features of Romanticism. Number 1, emotion over reason. Romantic thinkers and artists valued intense emotions like passion, awe, and melancholy over logic and rationality. Number 2, nature and the sublime. Nature was seen as a powerful, almost divine force, often depicted as wild, untamed, and awe-inspiring. Number 3, individualism and creativity. Romanticism celebrated the unique genius of individuals, including artists, poets, and revolutionaries. Number 4, the supernatural and the Gothic. Many romantic works explored the mysterious, supernatural, and eerie, giving rise to the Gothic genre. Number 5, revolutionary spirit. Inspired by events like the French and American revolutions, Romanticism embraced ideas of freedom, heroism, and defense against oppression. So, Romantic writers always gave emphasis to emotion, nature, individualism, creativity, the supernatural, and the Gothic elements, also revolutionary spirit. Impact of Romanticism on Indian English poetry. Romanticism had a profound influence on Indian English poetry, shaping its themes, style, and sensibilities. As Indian poets began writing in English during the 19th and the early 20th centuries, they absorbed romantic ideals from poets like Wordsworth, Coleridge, Keats, and Shelley. This influence was reflected in their love for nature, emphasis on emotions, and a deep sense of nationalism and individual expression. So we can say that Indian writers absorb romantic ideals from poets like, especially from English poets like Wordsworth, Coleridge, Keats, and Shelley. This influence was reflected in their poetry and they used romantic features in their poetry. Next, key ways Romanticism influenced Indian English poetry. Let's see how Indian English poetry was influenced by Romanticism. Number 1, love for nature and the sublime. Just like the British Romantics, Indian poets celebrated nature's beauty, spirituality, and power. For example, Thorudutt, one of the earliest Indian English poets, wrote about the beauty of the Indian landscape in poems like Our Cashew Nut Tree, much like Wordsworth's love for nature. Romantic poets always believe that nature has a beauty, nature has a spirituality, and nature has a power. So, just like British Romantics, Indian poets also wrote about the beauty of the Indian landscape. Our Cashew Nut Tree by Thorudutt is an example for that. Number 2, emotional and individual expression. Romanticism encouraged the exploration of personal emotions and inner struggles. Example, Sarojini Naidu, known as the Nightingale of India, wrote deeply lyrical and passionate poetry about love, longing, and human emotions, much like the Romantic poets. Romantic poets try to explore the personal emotions and inner struggles. Just like the British Romantic poets, Sarojini Naidu wrote deeply lyrical and passionate poetry about love, longing, and human emotions. Number 3, nationalism and patriotism. Romanticism's emphasis on individual freedom and national identity influenced Indian poets to use poetry as a tool for expressing patriotic fervor and anti colonial sentiment. Example: Henry Dorosio, a 19th century Indian poet, wrote to India, my native land, which reflects nationalist pride and a longing for India's past glory. Later, Rabindranath Tagore blended Romanticism with nationalist themes in poems like Where the Mind is Without Fear, promoting India's independence and cultural pride. Romanticism gave emphasis to individual freedom and national identity. Indian poets were influenced by this idea. They used poetry as a tool against colonial sentiment. This sense of nationalism and patriotism is seen in poems like To India My Native Land, which is written by Henry Dorosio. Another example is Rabindranath Tagore's poem Where the Mind is Without Fear. In this poem, Tagore promotes India's independence and cultural pride. Next, number 4, mysticism and spirituality. Indian poets infused romantic ideals with Indian philosophical and mystical traditions, creating a unique poetic voice. Example: Tagore's poetry combines romantic individualism with Vedantic spirituality, emphasizing divine connection through nature and music. Indian poets infused romantic ideals with Indian philosophical and mystical traditions, and they created a unique poetic voice. Tagore combined romantic individualism with Vedantic spirituality, and thus he created a connection between nature and divinity. Number 5, lyrical and musical quality. Inspired by Keats and Shelley, Indian poets used rich imagery, musicality, and sensory details in their poetry. Example: Sarojini Naidu's poetry often has a song-like quality as seen in Palanquin Bearers. Another feature of romantic poems is the rich use of imagery, musicality, and sensory details in their poetry. Like the British Romantic poets, Indian English poets also used imagery, musicality, and sensory details in their poetry. Sarojini Naidu's poetry has a song-like quality which is seen in poems like Palanquin Bearers. Romanticism deeply shaped Indian English poetry by blending Western literary traditions with Indian cultural themes. This influence helped Indian poets express their emotions, nationalism, and spiritual experiences in a rich and lyrical style. Over time, Indian English poetry evolved, incorporating modernist and post colonial themes, but Romanticism's legacy remains significant. So we can say that Indian English poetry was shaped by Western literary traditions and Indian cultural themes. This blending helped the Indian poets to express their emotions, nationalism, and spiritual experiences in a varied style. I hope this video will be helpful for you. Thank you.